it's part of what we have up there on the board. We're going to record the payroll in the journal. We're going to record the payroll taxes, and then we're going to pay those after we put the money into the payroll checking account. Why do we use that payroll checking account? What was the reason that I gave you the other day?
Checks and balances.
It's the checks and balances, as Kimberly said. When everybody has cashed their check, then that balance should be zero. It makes it a little easier to reconcile that account, that bank statement when it comes in, if we've transferred the money. Do you have to do it that way? No, you don't have to, but it does make it a little easier to check it and then to reconcile. We're going to record the payroll and the payroll taxes, record the payroll and paying of the payroll taxes, recording all of those withholdings that we have taken out, plus the 2 taxes that the employer is going to pay, workers' compensation if we have that, paying the SUDA and the FUDA and the workers' compensation, and then we'll look at the W-2, the W-3, the 940, and the 941. When we're paying these 2, remember those are going to different places. We can combine the payment if it's going to the federal government for the FIT and the FUDA, but I do not mind if you make them all separate transactions. That would be fine. I can grade it that way. And you don't have to pay these every month. If we have a good record, we might not need to pay it. I think I would want to pay it every month if it's a small amount, because if you forget to pay it, then you're really in trouble. So if you get into the routine of paying it every month, that would be a good thing. And remember, who pays the FUDA and the SUDA? The employer. All right, we don't withhold that from the employee's check. We learned how to calculate all of that in 7, and I'll be able to see that when you turn in your 7 homework. I usually look at the totals first, and then go back and look at the individual amounts if they don't come out. So make sure you have your totals on there. A lot of adding on there, a lot of calculating. And when we do that on the computer, it makes it so much easier. Did anybody do it in Excel? No? Okay. All right, these are just the accounts that we're going to be using. And you can see all of the tax accounts have the word payable. We're collecting it, we're going to hold it, it's a liability until we pay that. All right, so it all has the word payable after it, even the medical insurance payable, FIT payable, OASDI payable, wages and salaries payable. There's the cash and the payroll cash. And again, there's not an example of this transaction in your book. I think I've added it to the PowerPoint. This is from your book. It's just the rules of the debits and credits, what the T account looks like. If they have the word payable on the end, do they have a debit normal balance or a credit normal balance? A credit normal balance. Record the salaries expense. We need the payroll register. The salary wages expense is going to equal the gross. Okay, that's the amount that we're going to expense. And then we have all of the withholdings, which would be the taxes that we will pay on the payroll register. And then our net pay is going to use the account that's salaries and wages payable. So we're expensing the gross amount. And when you record that transaction, I've had some people on the test to put the gross, just put gross wages. No, that's not the proper name for that account. It's the expense account, wages and salaries expense, and then the net amount is going to be the wages and salaries, or salaries and wages, or just salaries, however it's listed, payable. There's the payroll register. And then there's what the transaction looks like when we record it. And if we take the numbers from the last two columns, remember I asked you to make those gross. And as I'm grading your payroll register, that's probably the one mistake that students make. Let me see if I can get that to go away. Touched it up here. The two expenses, those are the gross amounts. Do we always have to have two accounts there? No. Here we had, this was business scheduling and then cruise scheduling. We had two different types of employees. All of the deductions, FIT payable, SIT payable, OASDI payable, Medicare payable, medical insurance payable, and then there's the wages and salaries payable, and that's the net amount. The description to record the payroll for whatever the date is. That's enough. That's all you have to put there. The debit should equal the credits. I would add it up to make sure that they equal before you go to the next transaction. Do you see where all of those numbers are coming from the payroll register? Do you see where the net amount is coming from? The wages and salaries payable. It's coming from that net pay column, the total. On your test, I don't have you record the transactions from the payroll register that you're doing in case your payroll register doesn't come out correctly. I'll give you new numbers to work from so that if you have an error, it doesn't continue throughout the test. The payroll tax expense, different taxes are recorded in separate liability accounts. And we have the FICA OASDI, the FICA Medicare, the FUTA, and the SUTA. Now this is the transaction to record the payroll taxes. Where did we get those first two numbers? This one, and this one. From off of the register. Because remember, the employer has to match what we've withheld from the employee's check. So these two come from the payroll register. And they're just exactly the same numbers from that first transaction where we recorded the payroll. When we post these two transactions, this one and the previous one, then we're going to have this number in FICA OASDI payable 2 times, and this number in the Medicare 2 times. We have to have it in there twice. These two, only the employer is paying. Okay, those last two. The FICA taxes are paid to different government agencies, and we've already talked about that. If it's F, it's the federal, it's S, it's the state. Recording the payroll and paying the payroll taxes. This is the transfer of the funds using the payroll cash. And again, it's not in your book, but that's what the transaction looks like. That's the net amount that you're going to be using. We'll be transferring money from our regular cash to our payroll cash account. Once all of the checks have cleared, that amount should be 0. Record the payment of the salaries. And we've transferred the money. This is the wages and salaries payable and a credit to the payroll cash. That's the net amount that we're using. And the net amount, the amount of checks that we're going to be giving to our employees. Look at the description to record the payment of the, we've listed hourly payroll. Just say the payroll ending and whatever the date is. Here's just an example of a pay stub. Mine looks kind of like that now, when I log into my account, because we don't get a printed pay stub anymore. It's just all electronic. If you want a copy, you just have to print it. Does anybody else get paid that way? It goes directly into your checking account. Do you actually get an envelope with your pay stub in it? We used to for a while, I think until they used up all of their checks. We used to get a pay stub in a window envelope, you know, and then I think they ran out of those, and now it's just electronic. Anybody still get a check, a real check? Oh, you do, but you probably don't have very many employees, do you? 3. Yeah. So it depends on how many employees you have, whether you still write those checks or not. Andy, do you still get a check?
No, I get direct deposit. I have to do the same as you. If I want to see a pay stub, I have to log in.
Yeah. I only log in to look at it if I'm getting any extra page or something for somebody, just to make sure that's in there. My husband always says it's a surprise when I get paid, because my pay is never the same amount. I don't know why. It's always different.
I don't know if it's just because it's a church or because there's so few people, but I don't get a pay stub at all.
Oh, you don't know how much they're withholding? Oh, you should get that. Who does your payroll?
Volunteer at church.
Are they paying the taxes? Do you know?
When I get my W-2,
It says that
It's
they
on there.
are. I want to know.
I got caught like that 1 year. When we first went to that, we were online. I wouldn't, and I did overtime. Sometimes it was 3 hours a day, sometimes 6.
Oh, yeah.
I never
You
knew what
have
it
to
was,
check
so
that.
I didn't check it for a whole year. Where it turns out at the end of the year, they didn't take out taxes the entire year.
Oh, yeah.
There was none that, like, before you could do Irish, none.
Yeah, you had to pay it,
And they, the whole year.
even though it's their mistake.
Yeah, someone didn't transfer information over when it was in the system, and they didn't take it out of payment.
Yeah, we don't want surprises like that. I think I want to know what they were taking out. Or if they calculate it correctly. Is somebody calculating that in?
I calculate it.
Oh, you do?
And I turn it in. Well, I turn in, I show, you know, what goes where and all this, and then I turn it in, and he double checks the math, and then I get paid that amount.
So they probably have an employee record, like we have an example in our chapter 7, and you can see he's probably recorded it on there, maybe by hand,
Probably.
if there's only 3 employees. Oh, well. I always think about Northeast not taking out the OASDI, or the Medicare. The OASDI, they were exempt from it, the Medicare, they were not. And they weren't taking that out. And the employees had to pay it all, just like me. Oh, I wouldn't want a surprise like that. But that's kind of what your stub should look like for this table. It should show your total earnings for the year and then what you withheld. By December, those numbers are pretty large. What month was this? Does it say November? And you can see, look at the deductions year to date, 5,806. It's a lot. It's a lot that we have taken out. The tax return, the 941, it is just like the tax returns that we have to fill out as an individual. We will have an identification number, the employer identification number, and fill out one of those forms. I don't know that we'll get that far today, but probably on Thursday we'll do that. And then we have to record those taxes that we've withheld. There's an SS4, just to apply for the identification number. I think I told you that my daughter and another friend and I took out a booth at the Homestead Handcrafts. You know what that is? There's one on Michael and there's one on Thousand Oaks. And we had to have an EIN before we get open. Something weird.
Yeah, That is actually like a web app on the,
It is
on
now.
IRS.gov site, where they just immediately crank you out the,
Most of the things are, it's all electronic now, it's really not a paper. But you can still apply for it in paper if you don't have computer access. But we had to have the number. The friend that went into it with me already had a number, so we used her company name and didn't apply for a new one. But we're going to transfer that to my daughter, so that has to be a transfer, an official transfer from my friend Pam's name to my daughter's name. So we'll keep the same number, but we're going, because that number belongs to the company name, not to Pam. The FIT and the FICA, I noticed when I was checking some of your papers, when you're looking at that federal income tax form, where you've got to say where it's less than or greater than, and try to find how much is withheld, it's very small. So use your name tag, use a piece of paper to try to find that correct number. We're going to determine what the FIT and the FICA taxes are and what needs to be paid. We're going to report those on the 941, which is a quarterly federal tax return. Remember the calendar that I showed you on the binder that I brought in here? It would have that date on there to say this is when you need to file that. When we start working on the simulation for the payroll, you can see we have 3 different payrolls on that same payroll register. So you'll just use the same one, just skip a line under your totals and start the next month. I may give that to you on Thursday, the next simulation. And that one is not in my accounting lab. The Sullivan was, but this one is not. This is one that I made up. Bless you. The FIT and the FICA, we can transmit that electronically now. We used to take a little deposit slip to the bank, and the bank processed it. Kimberly, do you all still do it that way?
Do it, which way?
Do you make a payment at the bank, or do you do it electronically?
Yeah, no, we do it.
Okay, so you can still use the little deposit slip to make that payment. And if you're a small business, if you only have 3 employees, you might not want to do that electronically. So you still have that option, but most of them are done electronically. If a company owes less than $2,500 in total tax deposits quarterly, and if they're a monthly depositor, they deposit on the 15th day of every month, the employer pays less than $50,000 on the Form 941. We can use what they called a look back period to see whether they're going to be a monthly or a semi-weekly depositor. If it's a brand new business, it might be semi-weekly. It could even be a weekly depositor until they get a reputation established for how they make those payments. For this semi-weekly depositor, deposits the taxes within 3 banking days, and the employer pays more than $50,000. So see, it's the amount that we have to pay. And we're going to use that 941 and again use what they call the look-back period. And again, all of this will be in your problem to tell you whether they're a monthly depositor or a semi-weekly depositor. It's paid on what day of the following month? On the 15th, okay? And that's where that calendar would come in handy. Here's the journal entry to record the payment of the FIT and the FICA taxes. FICA OASDI payable, FICA Medicare payable, and that's our amount that we withheld times 2. The amount that we withheld from the employee's check times 2. And then here we're paying the FIT payable also. We can pay all of those in one payment because they're all going to the federal government. And then our description to record the payment of the FIT and the FICA taxes, and then put the pay period. the quarterly return, and we'll do one of those on Thursday, requires all the employers to complete that tax return to record all of those federal taxes that we must pay. If the taxes are less than the $2,500 for the calendar year, we have to pay it by January 31st of the following year. So we don't have to pay those monthly. If taxes total more than $2,500 for the calendar year, we have to pay it every quarter. And that's a lot to remember when you're doing your own payroll, and that's why that calendar would really help your clients, or even you if you're being responsible for making those payments. Just even a reminder in your computer. You can put a reminder in Peachtree also, or QuickBooks if you're using QuickBooks, to remind you when those payments are due. You could put it in your phone if it's your business. You know, you just want to be reminded when you need to make those payments. The computer does really make some of these things so much easier because we can be reminded, and that pop-up would just come up and say, don't forget to pay whatever, so you don't forget. If you forget, and you forget more than once, twice, 3 times, remember your business can be shut down. And that's a scary thought. Wouldn't want that. And as I've told you before, they're ruthless. They will come in during your busiest time of the day if you're a restaurant and just lock your doors. Everything that's in there would belong to them because they'll somehow have to recoup that money. Here's just a picture of the 941. It looks a little complicated, but as we fill in those numbers, it will seem much easier. We'll do one. And the directions are line by line, what to put on each line. Paying the FUTA and the SUTA and the workers' comp. Again, we've got some rules about if it's less than 500, if it's greater than 500. If it's less than 500, we don't have to pay it except once a year. If it's greater than 500, we need to pay it quarterly. And again, I'll give you those numbers. There's the recording in the journal of making that payment to the FUTA. Cash would be our credit, and then the payable amount for the tax would be our debit. The 940 prepared at the end of the calendar year, it's just like our tax return for our business. It's filed by January 31st. I know with my dad's recent surgery, he's kind of sweating some of his taxes. He had asked for an extension for some of his clients, and you can do that. There's no penalty for that. There's no penalty for asking for an extension after April 15th. And it used to always be the rule that April 15th your taxes were due, but they have extra people working for the IRS on April 15th. So you're less likely to be audited if you ask for an extension and file later. There's not as many employees because they've got lots and lots of employees up to April 15th to check all of those tax returns that are coming in. If taxes have to be paid, you have until February the 10th, and this is for a company, reports the amount of unemployment tax due for the year, calculated on the wages, not the total wages, not the individual earnings. And that's for the 940. And I think we have one of those to do in class also. Again, directions are line by line. It looks kind of complicated, but it's really not that bad. The SUTA tax is paid to the state government. It's usually due by the end of the month following each calendar quarter. So if we'll do January, February, March, it's due at the end of the next month. So this is April the 30th. And then we could, some of my questions will say if we're paying on April the 30th, what quarter would that be? You know, that's the types of questions that I'll ask you. And it's just the year divided into 4s. So this is for the SUTA. And again, the cash represents that we're making the payment. So those last 2 transactions, pay the payroll, pay the taxes, that's where cash is involved. Only on those. paying the workers' compensation insurance, credit to cash, and then prepaid workers' compensation insurance. Oh, did any of our problems in 7 have workers' comp in it? Do we have to calculate any? Okay, at the end of the year, one could owe more premiums or receive a refund. And the more workers' comp claims you have, then the higher that rate could be that you have to pay. But the workers' compensation is there for your employees or for you as an employee. When I was working at Northeast, and I've told Northeast I'm going to tell everybody that I know, so whenever we talk about workers' comp, I always share this story, was the beginning of the school year, and our school building was going to be open on a Saturday. Our principal was going to be there, and he told us that we could come and work in our rooms. Well, my computer lab at Northeast, we didn't have technicians that came in to set everything up like Bob was doing the other day. Thursday when he was in here doing that for me, he just does it. He keeps up with that. I don't have to do that anymore. But at Northeast, I was responsible for my room. And there had been a summer school class taught in there. We didn't have a lockdown like we have in here, where if you make any changes, as soon as we turn off the machine and boot it back up, it goes back to how it was. I didn't have that in my room. So on that Saturday, I went into work, and I was rolling around from one computer to the other computer, working on all 30 computers, went to sit down, and I fell. The chair just scooted out from under me. Well, the principal insisted that I fill out a workers' comp form. I said, I'm all right. No, you have to fill out a workers' comp form. Okay, so I did. And again, I was still okay. Didn't hurt myself, just kind of twisted my wrist, but you know, it went away after a while. I wasn't hurt. I got a letter about a month after that from HR saying that it wasn't within the course and scope of my job description to be there on a Saturday, and I was a volunteer. Now, my friend, who was the superintendent at another school district, said, Cheryl, they are breaking the law. And I said, but is it worth the fight? I wasn't hurt. But what if I had been? But what if I had been really hurt? You know, broken my tailbone or broken my arm, or, you know, I could have been. But I did not consider myself a volunteer being there on Saturday. Our contract as an instructor is that we have other duties as assigned. Well, my assignment was to work on that lab. So I've told the person, and it was the assistant, went as far as the superintendent and the assistant superintendent, and I said, I'm okay, I did not get hurt, but what if I had? And you're telling me I'm a volunteer. Am I a volunteer as soon as the bell rings at 3:30 or 4 o'clock? And then I have after-school programs with students? Am I a volunteer if I'm there before 9 o'clock when the bell rings for classes to start? What's covered and what isn't? Now, granted, there are a lot of workers' comp claims that are not true. One of my students several years ago told me of someone who was on The Price is Right. You know how you have to raise up and spin that big wheel? They were on a workers' comp claim from somewhere. And guess what? They could spin that wheel. So if somebody sees you, you know, you could lose that. There are companies that have private investigators that are following people that have filed workers' comp, especially back injuries. How do you even say that that's true or that it's not true? But if you're out cutting down trees or trimming trees or, you know, doing landscape or building houses, whatever, and someone's watching you and you have a workers' comp claim, then you could lose that. The workers' comp as an employer, we want to make sure that we're covering our employees And we're not saying things like they're a volunteer, but I've kept my word. I've told everybody that I know. And I get about 30 students every year that I get to share that story. That was bad. That was wrong. That was just downright wrong. Now, I'm sure they have other people that maybe hurt themselves outside of school and then come to school and say they get hurt. But I have been an employee there for 15 years and had never filed a workers' comp. You, as the owner of a business, make sure that you take good care of your employees. But you also don't want that rate to go up, that you have too many people on workers' comp. Another note about the workers' comp, it will gradually be transferred from the prepaid account of workers' comp expense account, and we'll make that payment then. And at the end of the year, one could owe more premiums or receive a refund if we have a good credit, a good record, a good reputation for the workers' comp. Here's our W-2. Remember, we have to fill that out at the end of the year for each one of our employees. Kimberly, is yours typed or is it filled out by hand?
It's typed.
Okay, so someone is probably just typing that by hand. You still have a typewriter at work? You can process it on the
He
computer
does
now.
all the accounting stuff at his home.
Okay, so he probably has a program of some kind that he's preparing those W-2s. But I have seen some of those handwritten. We just have to give that to the employees. Does anybody remember what day we have to give it to our employees? At the end of January. We have to get it by the end of January. One of your questions was if you're moving, can you request that W-2? You can request it, but that doesn't mean they'll give it to you. You can request it. And I don't know why that would be difficult to go ahead and prepare it if you're using a computerized system. But they don't always give it to you right then when you're leaving. But make sure they have your current address if you're changing a job so that you can get that W-2 at the end of the year. There's just an example of one. I think they still look pretty much like that. The W-3 transmittal of the income and the tax reports. We're going to send that to the Social Security Administration with copies of each employee's W-2, what we've withheld, the total earnings and what we've withheld from their checks. There's an example of it. Again, if we were using a computerized system, it would just fill that form out. Then there's lots at the end for the summary. Okay, so take time to go back and read that, and then read the summary at the end of 7 also. On our schedule, when does it tell us that we're taking our test? On the week of April the 8th. And we'll probably take it on Tuesday that week, so the 8th. We still have a little while. We still have some work that we need to do. All right, if you'll get your journal out. Anybody doesn't have their journal for 7? I gave it to you the other day. If you don't have one, I have a couple extras.